Awesome. Thank you so much. Well, welcome to our first panel where we are exploring careers in health and wellness. My name is Cassandra Richardson, and I work as the Equity and Justice Communications Manager at National Wildlife Federation. I also co-lead the Federation's Community Care Committee, which brings me here. At last year's Eco Careers Conference, we featured speakers working in hospitals and public health agencies, and this year we are focusing on wellness. Due to the impacts of the global pandemic, the increasing urgency of climate change, and the many ongoing socio-political crises that we all face, as well as daily stresses, mental health and wellness have become a greater topic of conversation and media attention in recent years. This panel is featuring 4 speakers who have each focused on wellness in their careers in different ways, and we will begin by introducing the speakers and ask them each to share a bit about their career paths, how they got where they are now, and to give advice for today's students. Looks like some sound issues might be happening. I can reconnect after we start here. First, we will start with Ashanti Carter. Ashanti serves as the program manager of the Rodham Institute, located at the School of Medicine and Health Sciences at the George Washington University. At Rodham, Ms. Carter produces content for the Rodham Impact Speaker Series, a bi-monthly series of webinars that brings together thought leaders and community advocates from across the country. Ms. Carter also leads the Health Education and Leadership Program, a longitudinal pipeline program for high school students from Title I schools that provides scholars with the tools that will enable them to not only graduate from high school, but also college. Ms. Carter, who is originally from Los Angeles, worked as a teacher for the Los Angeles County Office of Education and graduated with a Master of Public Health from Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science. She is currently a doctoral candidate in the Higher Education Administration program at the George Washington University Graduate School of Education and Human Development. Ashanti's goal is to serve as an administrator in student affairs in a post-secondary education institution. So, Ashanti, please, the floor is all yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you for having me. Thank you, David. Thank you, Cassandra. And thank you, Hannah. It's so good to see you. So my name is Ashanti Carter, and I do serve as the program manager of the Rodham Institute at GW. So I want you to keep in mind the word pivot, right? Keep that word in mind. Pivot means to turn. So you're probably thinking, oh my gosh, this is great. She's in public health. That's what she went to school for. No, I wanted to be a physician. That was my career goal. It was to be a doctor, and graduated from high school. I'm a first gen college student from Los Angeles, South Los Angeles, actually. And I was very excited, graduated with honors, and ended up going to UC San Diego, the University of California, San Diego, huge public research university. When I say huge, yeah, so organic chemistry lecture, I think it was like 300 of us in the lecture hall. And this was back, I'm a lot older than I look. So we were getting the internet, right? We were getting it. It was coming on board. And you guys, I was lost. I was so lost. I felt like I was just this little person just trying to scurry and find their way. And I graduated from UCSD, thank God, loved my time there. But when it came to applying to medical school, it was like, ruh-roh. Woo, those grades were ugly, right? So I had some C's on my transcript. C's stand for can do better. So I thought, okay, back in the day, we were getting a post-baccalaureate program, but I thought, okay, well, maybe I can just retake those courses. You guys, my little compass was broken. So this is what I did. I ended up studying for the MCAT. Took it, didn't do well. And I said, you know what, I'm older, let me just get a job. Let me work and use the degree that I ended up getting, right? Did that, worked as a teacher for LA County Office of Education, loved the work that I did. I worked with juvenile involved youth. Love that. I taught math and science. I had always been in the education field, even as a student. I was a tutor. And, as I began to work, it's kind of like, okay, I got some bad advice. Someone said, okay, just go to one of those Caribbean medical schools. You don't even have to retake your MCAT, just go, apply and go. I didn't research the school, I just went. And when I went, I'm a lot older, had been working for a long time. I'm looking around. I loved what I was learning, but there was a mismatch with the school. The school just wasn't for me. So I left, went back to teaching. And then I said, I want to go into post-secondary education. Medicine was still calling me. You guys, I ended up getting a job at a medical school. That was hilarious. Got a job at a medical school and I thought, how is it? What are you guys doing here? What's the secret? Started learning about admissions, started learning about the medical education curriculum. And I thought, that's why I didn't make it. I didn't have the capital that I needed to exchange for admissions to medical school. There was something more, something bigger that was at play, right? And so I began to manage pipeline programs. And I thought, I want to go back to school. And I started learning about public health. And I learned about the social determinants of health, right? So as you think about the social determinants of health, think about drinking coffee. Coffee in its natural state is bitter. So some of us, we use some kind of a sweetener to cut the bitterness. The social determinants of health, it works the same way. So the health part, that's the coffee. The social determinants of health, that includes education, your access to medical care, living in a community that is highly resourced, having access to social capital that can give you the information that you need to navigate education services, right? So when I started learning about that, I had an aha moment. And by that time, my desire to be a physician, that long vanished. And so I pivoted into a career in public health. So at Charles Drew, I began to manage these pipeline programs. And if you know about Charles Drew University, it is the only historically Black graduate institution on the West Coast. It's in Watts. So after I graduated, I ended up doing, did some work, moved to the East Coast. That's how I ended up at GW. And I began to work with students, helping them to realize their dream of education and giving them the right advice by inviting them into the conversation. And as I was working with one of my mentors, I said, I still want to go back to school because I'm supposed to be Dr. Carter. So there are different kinds of doctors that are out there, not just an MD, a medical doctor. You can be a PhD, you can be an EDD. So I asked my mentor, Dr. Thomas Levis, who's written so much on the social determinants of health and health disparities. And he said, I've seen you with students. I've seen you with them. Man, you're good. So I said, okay, I'm going to go back to school and get my doctorate in education. And that's where I am. So once my supervisor, Dr. Levis, left, he's now the dean at Tulane, I ended up getting a job with the Rodham Institute. That last name should sound very familiar. We are named after Secretary Hillary Rodham Clinton's mother, Dorothy Rodham. Education has a transformative impact on students. It changed my life. So with my experiences, I lead, as you heard in the introduction, the Health Education and Leadership Program, where we work with students from high school. We should be working with them when they're younger, but from high school, but we don't just stop once they graduate from high school. We continue to work with them even while they're in college so they don't end up like me. They have the knowledge that they need. So if they say, Ms. Ashanti, I want to be a doctor, then in high school, you are going to have internship opportunities to introduce you to the field, the broad field of health. not just being a physician, but also looking at public health, nursing, biomedical sciences. And then when you get to college, I want to make sure that you understand how to study for those gateway courses, such as chemistry and organic chemistry. Then I want to introduce you to more internship opportunities that medical schools look for. Then after that, we want to make sure that you're well prepared and equipped to effectively pass your medical college admissions test, the MCAT. So there is a way that you study. Then after that, mock interviews. Once you get to medical school, we'll still work together. How do I know that works? Yes, my star student, Dr. Mei Lee, she's completing her residency in anesthesiology. I coached her from college all the way to medical school, and this young woman ended up getting a full ride to Drexel University. She graduated debt-free. So it works. So I want to let you know it's okay to pivot. No, I'm not a physician, but I help and develop to create future physicians, which then helps and create a pipeline, which will create a system of health equity. Because if you didn't know, this week is National Public Health Week, and the theme is public health is where you are. So I encourage you to practice public health, it's where you are, and looking at education. So it's okay to change your mind. It's okay, but make sure that you have a plan and you have mentors in your life who can effectively guide you to the finish line. So that's my time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ashanti. Next, we'll hear from Hannah Malvin. Hannah is a coach and consultant with more than a decade of experience working in progressive politics. She's focused on making workplaces more equitable and boosting staff well-being, rooted in her training in positive psychology. She offers staff retreats, trainings, technical assistance, and coaching, and has worked with congressional offices, federal agencies, nonprofits, foundations, and Fortune 500 companies. Hannah is also a program manager for the Bridge program, a public-private partnership and equitable hiring pathway for the environmental sector focused on people of color. In 2016, she founded Pride Outside, now the main hub for LGBTQ outdoor inclusion initiatives with Congress, federal agencies, and conservation nonprofits. Hannah, the floor is all yours.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here with everyone today, and good to see you, Ashanti. And I'll continue with the theme of pivoting. So I can share a bit about what I've been up to over the years, and then some advice, and happy to answer any questions later. So I was a high school activist and an athlete, and was always interested in how people can come together to do big things, whether that's in sports or in social movements. And I would say over the years, I really got interested in how do you sustain yourself in that? How do you live your best life along the way? So first it was sort of what does it take to achieve big things? And then later on it was sort of, and can we include some well-being there too? So I studied political science at Brown, and I was a rower. And after I finished up college, I got to train with the national team for a year, and won a national championship that got cut before the Olympics. And came to DC, started working for my congressman, my hometown congressman. I had done some informational interviews to get started, so connected with people where you're just allowed to ask them about their career paths. If you haven't heard of an informational interview, you're just allowed to reach out to someone who does things that who works in a field you're interested in, and ask them about their career path and how they got there and advice that they have. And so that was how I got the internship, and then got hired on and stayed there for 5 years, got to be a legislative advisor on health and foreign affairs, immigration, a bunch of different issues. I got to be a staff lead for the Congressional Autism Caucus, which was really interesting, getting to work on policy around that. And I then wanted to make a pivot at some point. So I had led canoe trips in over college summers and kept going on those for vacations. And I had been on an awesome canoe trip up in the Yukon when a friend of mine was working up there at Knowles. For 2 weeks, 4 of us friends got dropped in the middle of nowhere with 2 canoes, and we just went for 2 weeks down a river with no people, no campsites, no trails. We were just out there. And when we got back, I had felt so lucky to be connected to the outdoors, to know where to go, what to do, what to bring, feel like I belonged out there. I wanted to help share that with other folks. And as an outdoorsy lesbian, I was looking around at sort of the diversity outdoors world and wanted to work to support my community. So I started Pride Outside to connect the LGBTQ community around the outdoors, which has expanded over the years. And we now are a main hub working with Congress, federal agencies, and conservation nonprofits on LGBTQ outdoor inclusion initiatives. We just hosted our LGBTQ Outdoor Summit, our 4th one, bringing folks together around that. And the theme was joy and connection. So coming off that last weekend. But so I started that, and that was just initially taking some friends on hikes and doing hikes, outdoor skills classes, LGBT history walking tours. And I was sort of getting that going and started doing some informational interviews to get a sense of what kind of jobs are there around diversity in the outdoors, because you grow up knowing some possible career paths, but not all of them, and they keep changing. So I figured I had to talk to people to figure out what was out there. And I went pretty overboard. So when I say that I talked to 200 people, I don't want that to intimidate people or make anyone feel like they have to talk to 200 people to get a job. You do not. This was my way of going about it. I am fascinated by how people do their career paths, how people make choices, and what they see as possible and how they make stuff happen. So please don't take that as demoralizing. Instead, I would encourage you to take it as like there's so many people out there and there's all kinds of possibilities, but you don't have to do it that way. So I can just toss out some anecdotes from that. So number 21 in my informational interviews introduced me to number 65, and I volunteered at her organization's fundraiser where I sat next to my favorite adventure podcast host, and then met number 126, who later ended up hiring me. But along the way, number 141 interviewed me for a job, and I didn't get, but he became a mentor. A friend introduced me to number 38, who introduced me to 48, to 54, to 81, to 138, to 139, and we founded the LGBTQ Outdoor Summit together. I ended up adopting 134's cats. I went on a Shenandoah cabin weekend with number 110, and went camping in Death Valley with 146. With 147, made me an ambassador for her inflatable stand-up paddleboard company. I dated 152's best friend. I volunteered for 63 at the World Ranger Congress and got to spend time with 300 park rangers from 90 countries. So I say all that to say, and I also met Ashanti in an informational interview at one point. So I just say that this can be really expansive. So obviously the job is important. At the end of the day, in a job search, you're looking for the job. But that it can also just be so expansive and enriching, and you can see it as really all kinds of ways to enhance your life. So I ended up getting a job at the Wilderness Society in outdoor recreation policy and worked there for a bit, then sort of was taking on new responsibilities and got promoted to work on our partnerships work. So a senior representative for partners. So we had like 400 partners and 140 staff, and there wasn't really a rhyme or reason to who we were working with or how we were working together. And I got to work on re-envisioning it, our partnerships work, including staff learning and rooting it in social justice, and loved working around workplace culture and equity. and some interesting projects on building a public lands history curriculum that was more inclusive, and native lands initiative, some really cool stuff. I ended up getting laid off during restructuring and had to figure out a new move. And from the workplace culture and the equity work, I was thinking of really where I wanted to go with that. And I felt like there was something missing and I wanted to add in well-being. So I think that work often gets heavy, and I think that staff well-being was an area that I really wanted to move towards. So I found programs in positive psychology and coaching and got certified in those. Positive psychology is the scientific study of well-being. I did 100 informational interviews that time around with folks in learning and development. I just find this stuff so interesting, so I talked to people who train community organizers, diplomats, federal employees, political candidates, nonprofit leaders, corporate executives, teachers, museum interpreters, network leaders, park rangers, university employees, and even someone who trained clowns going into hospitals in conflict zones. So just like that, you can sort of dive in and see what's out there. And so I ended up starting my own business, and I do coaching and consulting around making work more equitable, effective, and enjoyable. And I'm the program manager for the Bridge program, which is an equitable hiring pathway for the environmental sector focused on people of color and underrepresented communities. We just dropped jobs yesterday, so I can share in the chat more info on those and lots of resources. And we hired 20 people last year, worked with 300 candidates and trained 700 people from 55 organizations in equitable hiring. And then I work with congressional offices and federal agencies, employee resource groups, elected officials around making work more equitable and enjoyable. So it's been so fun to dig into that positive psychology to if traditional psychology has focused on mental illness and trauma and sort of getting back to neutral, it looks at what are the areas of life that we want to cultivate to be flourishing, to be north of neutral, to be thriving. And so getting to work with individuals and coaching on that, getting to work with organizations on changing their culture, changing their policies, so both we need to work at the systemic level to make change, and along the way also there are supports and mindset shifts and practices we can do individually to help support ourselves along the way, and our teams and the groups we're a part of. So I love getting to focus on staff well-being, and it's exciting that there's more emphasis on that since sort of COVID, and there's I hope that continues, and it's exciting to get to dig into it with organizations. So overall, I'd encourage you to talk to people to see what's out there, what kinds of opportunities exist. I think of it like if it used to be a career ladder, then Sheryl Sandberg said it could be like a career jungle gym that, you just need to keep your eye out for moving around. People may zig or zag. You could have unexpected paths. I would say, in my mind, it's a scavenger hunt to see what's out there, to look for cool people, resources, and opportunities. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Hannah. I am also a big fan of informational interviews. Next, we will hear from John Polly. John is the executive chef at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center's Magee Women's Hospital in Pittsburgh. Even though he graduated from the University of Pittsburgh with a degree in economics, John has never shaken his love of food and its magical powers, having spent more than half of his life in kitchens. On top of overseeing all food production operations at the hospital, John leads sustainability initiatives for both Magee as well as for food services across the UPMC system. His initiatives and interests include reducing food waste, working with community food rescue organizations, emphasizing plant-based and seasonal meals, composting, and regenerative agriculture. He is the 2021 graduate of Mad Academy's Environment and Sustainability program in Copenhagen, Denmark, and continues to champion the many ways in which food can heal both people and planet. Go ahead, John.
Thank you so much. Can everyone hear me okay? I hope. Just some thumbs up. Yeah, cool. All right. So thank you for that introduction. I am John Pauly, and I am the executive chef at UPMC Magee Women's Hospital in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I think the overarching theme of what I would like to talk to you about today is I didn't plan any of this. I ask myself sometimes, like, how did I get here and where am I going, right? And I think everyone needs to ask that question often, as many times as you can, because we think we know, I think the biggest mistake, I was talking to someone this morning, I said, well, the biggest mistake of my life was thinking I knew what I wanted to do when I was 18, right? When I was 18, I wanted to play in punk bands. I wanted to be a fiction writer, and I didn't really think about income, okay? That's not a sustainable life, right? I always was a decent musician, but never the best. I usually played louder than I did better. I was always, a pretty good writer. I still consider myself a decent writer, but I don't really think I have the attention span to pursue a full novel, which is a problem. Short stories were always my forte. And then lastly, I just didn't really know what was going to be what sustained me, that kept me kind of interested and committed. And so for the good, right out of high school, I went to Boston, Massachusetts. I studied at Emerson College for a year. I did creative writing there, and I was more interested in Boston than I was in going to class. And I went to class, I did okay. But after a year, I thought, okay, you know what? I'm going to go back. I'm going to stop, and I'm going to say, where am I and what am I doing? And for a year, I worked at a grocery store in the Strip District of Pittsburgh, which is the old neighborhood with all the old falling down, old decrepit buildings, but the amazing markets, the Lebanese markets, the Italian markets. And I fell in love with business and small business and family-owned business. And that started to plant some seed in me that I wanted to support people that were still doing things kind of the older way, that kind of romantic view of buying your bread from the baker, your meat from the butcher, your flowers from the floral shop, and so on and so forth. And then I said, you know what, maybe I will try to get a degree. And so I went to California and I studied for 2 years at the University of Pacific in Stockton, California, and I studied environmental studies. So how do you go from love of small business to environmental studies? I don't know. I thought that, my love of travel, and I thought my love of, always kind of trying to tackle bigger problems and things of that nature kind of drove me to that. I got very interested in economics, labor economics, most specifically. And then my father got laid off. My family was in extreme financial straits. They were trying to help me as best they could while I was in California. I decided to go back to Pittsburgh, and I started working at an Italian bakery and being a bread baker, and then also going to the University of Pittsburgh to finish up a degree in economics. So this is, at this point, we're just doing this. There is no clear straight line. I'm just kind of zigging and zagging. And I kind of rekindled my love for that small business, that family-owned business, that doing things by hand and meeting people and kind of doing that. So what I did was I started as a dishwasher at a bakery. I moved up to be a bread baker. Then I was the lead baker. Then I was the cafe manager. Then I turned into the general manager of the whole business, which I then expanded our production into a giant warehouse. And I bought these cool ovens, and we still mixed thousands of pounds of biscotti by hand. And I went out and got grocery lines. I developed a line of cookies for groceries, and it was all really great. And I was like, this is me. This is it. I'm going to build a business that we are making millions of dollars, and we're doing it all with, wooden rolling pins and good personality. And I was really excited about that. But then some reality hit me, and I had, I gotten married. I had 2 children, and I wasn't getting healthcare, and I wasn't getting any paid time off. And, your kids get sick when they're in daycare. And so, it was hard. And in the meantime, I started selling cookies to hospitals in the UPMC system, which, if you're not familiar, is the largest employer in Pennsylvania with over 90,000 employees, 44 hospitals and growing. And these hospitals expand all throughout Pennsylvania, up into New York and down to Western Maryland. And I started to meet people there, and they started to say, hey, this is kind of a more sustainable life. You can not have to work every weekend, and you can, start to grow your career in a bigger company. And I thought, oh, that's cool, except for that is the exact opposite of who I am. I am all about the small business owner. I am not about the billion dollar corporation that has this mighty weight, and it was a morally conflicting thing for me. But I did it, right? I did it. I took a job, and I was a cafeteria supervisor, which was nothing I ever wanted to be. And I did that for 2 years. But again, at that point, you stop, you look at where you are. Life led you here, right? You didn't decide necessarily this was what. When I was 18 and you said, hey, John, whenever you're 25, you're going to be a father of 2 and working in a hospital cafeteria, I would have laughed at you and said, you're watching the wrong movie, and please don't ever talk to me again, because that's not who I am. And there's nothing wrong with that career choice, right? But it just didn't feel like me. I was a romantic guy who wanted to do these crazy big things. And then I'm standing there and I'm saying, what am I going to do? And what I decided to do was look at the problems I saw in where I was. And being someone who from 15 years old on worked in kitchens, really started to appreciate the value of food. Its worth as far as its nourishing powers, especially inside of a hospital. Its value to the people that don't have it, right? Like there's so many people. I mean, in Pennsylvania, in my area, 1 in 7 people do not have enough food. And that's a shame. Like that is a terrible, crazy shame. And then lastly, we dump 40% of all food we make into terrible, landfills and places where it just goes to waste. And there's just, you start to crack this Pandora's box open, right? And I worked really hard to get out of the cafeteria, that supervisory role. I was wearing like a tie, and I couldn't stand it. I hate that way that feels on my throat. And so I worked really hard, and the job of my dreams as far as the UPMC world opened up, which was the executive chef job at McGee. McGee is one of the coolest hospitals you'll ever go to. And I know that sounds weird. We have 2 organic gardens on site. We raise a couple beehives across the street. We don't necessarily subscribe to the traditional convenience foods and the easy make things. We do, I'd say our menu is 90% scratch. We are pushing every time. We are going seasonal. We are going, and a lot of this was me, right? Because I came in and they were poured soup from bags. But I had the leadership that was like, yeah, go ahead, do what you want to do. And right around the same time, I got a call from my old boss who had hired me into UPMC. And he said, hey, man, I started this Green Initiatives thing about 5 years ago. I just got a new job. I can't do it anymore. I think you would be great at it. So for 3 years now, that's been me, right? When you think about it, oh, he's a chef, what kind of effects could he have? Well, let me tell you the kind of effects we can have, right? And I kind of touched on this. We can, well, first of all, I approached it from like an environmental standpoint. I thought, okay, let's stop throwing food away because that'll be great. We'll compost everything. Well, that's not the solution, right? Because then you're just feeling better about where you put your trash. So then it was like, let's reduce waste. And I highly recommend you look at the pyramid that the EPA has put out on reducing food waste. It's really cool. And it's kind of my guide path for what I'm doing. And I think about feeding people first. I think about using better ingredients and more seasonal ingredients so that we don't get poor ingredients and throw them away. Thinking smarter about our portioning and all of these great things. And I did so much research. I thought I would go back to school. I did get an economics degree from University of Pittsburgh. Thought maybe I'd go get an MBA in like sustainability focus. And then I said, you know what? I'm just going to read every book I possibly can. So for 2 years, I just read everything under the sun. And we're talking from soil health to, what you should eat to what kind of foods we should eat to help with the climate problem to even just draw down with all the solutions of all our carbon. And I just geeked out on this so hard. And I just went down this rabbit hole, and I'm so happy I did, because now I can proudly say that I'm 35 years old. My sons are 9 and 6. And I finally figured out what I want to do. And that's what I'm doing now. I am going full force into it. I lead all environmental initiatives here for the whole McGee hospital, and then also for food services across our 44 hospital system. I can tell you that it is insanely hard work. And all of those titles I just mentioned, everything after executive chef is not my official job. I do it because I love it. I'm doing it because I hope one day someone will go, John, you have proved how magical food is and how it can save the planet and it can save people and it can make our community stronger and it can show other people that it's possible. That's what I want. I don't know if that's going to happen, but I'm going to keep working on it. So I'm working to create change within this massive system that is in, my home state, which is just spreading and is trying to be a player amongst the other hospital systems in the country, a lot of which are further ahead in this environmental responsibility and these ideas. So I look at this and I think, as it was mentioned in the introduction, I did get to go to Copenhagen last summer as part of a week-long program. Oh my gosh, they figured it out. Like, as a city, it's amazing. They take care of their people. It's clean. There's great public transportation. Their restaurants care about the environment. Their hospitals and their government do. And you think like, oh, I'll go live in a utopia that, has already figured this out. But then you go, no, I'm going back to Pittsburgh where it's all terrible. Nobody's doing this. Go fight the fight. Like, go find what gets you ready and get you excited and get you like pumped up to make good change. That's what happened to me. And it took me a long time. I mean, I'm almost twice as old as I was when I left to go to Boston and be a famous writer that did all kinds of silly things and traveled the world. I never made it there. But the more I think about it now, my son is 9 and came up to me one day and was like, Dad, I want to save the world too. And I was just like, that's it. Like, that's what we're going to do. My kids are super excited about this. My team here at McGee, I have 25 cooks and dishwashers under me. It's so great to go see a guy that never recycled in his life, composting food waste and doing it responsibly. It's so great to see a cook who's never thought twice about throwing his kale stems in the garbage can, trying to think, can we pickle these and reuse them? And seeing the way that just being enthusiastic about what you're, what you're into can really just ripple effect. Now people are calling me from all around the system asking, hey, we want to talk about what you're doing at McGee. Now I'm getting, invitations. I'm going to Kansas City and to speak for Clean Med, which is like a huge, huge conference for environmentalism in hospitals. And I'm going to talk about how if we just paid attention to the seasons, it would be so great for health and planetary health. I'm into a million things. I could talk forever. You could ask me a question and I might not ever answer it, but I'll answer 17 others. I'm so excited and so thankful that you guys let me come on and talk about my path, which I can tell you, I'm sitting here right now and saying, where am I and where am I going? I know where I am right now. I don't know exactly where I'm going, but I know that I figured it out. I'm super excited that wherever it takes me, I definitely want to do something big. So I'll leave you with a quote that's been very inspiring to me by a guy named Wes Jackson, who founded the Land Institute in Kansas. And Wes is an agriculturist, a biologist. I can't remember exactly what his title is, but he decided that we should have more perennial crops, that we should grow things that we don't have to rip out and retill and destroy topsoil, do all this stuff. And he's developing a wheat called Kernza, which is a perennial wheat, which has a higher yield, which will dig down feet into the ground and do amazing things for drawing carbon out, all this stuff. And it also tastes great. I actually just tried something with it the other day. But when asked about his work, because it's so big and so big, he said, you know what? If you're working on a problem that you can solve in your lifetime, you are not thinking big enough. So think about that. How can you start pushing that boulder up the hill? How can you get that boulder to the top of your hill and maybe set other people up to help you shove it over? So I'll leave you with that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, John. It's really nice to hear your passion. Finally, we'll hear from Dr. Jennifer Atkinson. Dr. Atkinson is an author and associate professor of environmental humanities at the University of Washington. She researches eco-anxiety, grief, and hope, and teaches seminars on climate and mental health that have been featured nationwide. Dr. Atkinson is currently working on a book titled An Existential Toolkit for the Climate Crisis, which offers strategies to help young people navigate the emotional toll of climate breakdown. Her podcast, Facing It, also gives people tools to channel eco-anxiety into action. Dr. Atkinson, can you please tell us more about your career path?
Yeah, thank you. I just want to say it is so intimidating to go last after hearing from all of you, but I'm so inspired to be on this panel with all of these rock stars. Um, as Cassandra mentioned, I am a professor in the field of environmental humanities, and that might be unfamiliar to some, but in a nutshell, rather than looking at physical or biological or atmospheric aspects, those of us in the environmental humanities are really focusing on cultural dimensions of our environment. So how do we represent problems like climate change or environmental justice in film or the arts or literature, popular culture? And then, how do those cultural forms shape the way that we do or don't respond to the problems we're facing? So I think of the sciences as addressing the what of environmental issues, while the humanities sort of digs deeper into digs beneath into like the why and the how. And I took a pretty unconventional path, although at the beginning it was a very linear path. When I was an undergraduate in college, I just loved to read growing up. And so I wanted to keep doing that as a college student. So I just was thinking in very, very conventional terms, like, okay, I'll get a degree in English literature. And so I went into the humanities. I went all the way, basically just took that from undergraduate to master's to PhD, never really deviated. And I ended up getting a PhD in English, of all things. And that was really confusing to people around me because I had always wanted to go into an environmental field, but I just knew that the sciences were not my strength. So I just kind of stuck with what felt safe to me. I think part of it was I was just like a coward. So I was going to do what was familiar to me. But again, the assumption was for those who kind of pushed back on this, like, this is not the right way to go into environmental work. The assumption is if you want to do a particular type of work, you have to get a degree in that area. And I'm so glad that I didn't listen to that advice. And I think everything you've heard from the other panelists really just confirms this. I didn't know at the time it was bad advice. I was just being stubborn and doing what I wanted. But I think that both the data and all the stories we're hearing from other panelists show that the best way to succeed in a career is not necessarily to have a slip of paper showing your degree in that particular discipline, but to be really good at what you do. And you are typically good at what you do if you're passionate and you're following your interests, and then use that success and passion in your particular skill area to forge a path into the career you want. So for me, that's where it started, was trying to use my strengths in writing and communication and the humanities to get a job teaching about the way that our natural world is represented in literature and the arts. But then what happened over time, this was really just in the last 5 years, the main focus of my research really turned towards the emotional dimensions of climate change and the way that it impacts mental health. There were two things that led me in that direction. One was my own personal journey of despair from witnessing all of this climate destruction and inaction over the years, both on a global level and on a personal level. I was experiencing a lot of grief and depression over the endless wildfires that we deal with out in the West now. And it really hit home for me when the area where I grew up in California and really the places that inspired me to want to be an environmental activist, they burned and just turned to ashes. And so going home just didn't feel like home to me anymore. But it wasn't just me feeling that distress. And that's the second factor that really got me into climate psychology. For years, I was watching my own students spiral into despair as they learned about our climate crisis and the scale of the problems that we're facing. And that hopelessness was not only interfering with their ability to learn and to imagine creative solutions, but it was just starting to interfere with their everyday life and their functioning. And there's some really fascinating research out there showing that the fear about our future is at an all-time high among youth right now. And it's impacting everything from sleep to eating patterns. A lot of young people now say that they don't want to have kids because the future seems so grim. And I think that's when it occurred to me that, both as educators and as students, we're learning the content and the facts around environmental issues. I mean, that's the way we've always done it in Western education. But that material it can be so heartbreaking that, it seems like a huge oversight to not also learn the psychological and the mental health tools to cope with this on an emotional level, especially when we acknowledge that, we're going to be doing this work for the rest of our lives and across many generations to come. And so we've got to really be prepared for the fact that it can be an emotional roller coaster, and that we're going to feel grief and anger and frustration and burnout at times, that all of this work raises some real existential questions about our future on the planet. And so while learning the science and the policy is important, we need these other existential tools, not just to survive the turmoil, but to do the work needed to mitigate the causes of that turmoil in the first place. So just to wrap up, I want to leave time for questions for all the other panelists as well. But that was the insight that really led me to start teaching a seminar on climate grief and resilience and hope at the University of Washington. I also wanted to reach a larger audience beyond my own students. And so I created, and I host a podcast called Facing It, which explores climate despair and hope, and why our emotional responses are so essential to effectively addressing this threat. And I always invite students and young people and people I don't even know to reach out and connect with me individually. And I can drop my social media and my podcast in the chat if anybody does want to connect that way. I'm always happy to talk more, but I can stop there just to leave time for the Q&A and put all of these different interesting career pathways in conversation with each other.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thank you to all of our speakers for your perspectives shared so far. We will now shift into the Q&A section. First question that is directed towards all who feel called to answer is, what is the best bit of advice that you have for someone looking to move into the health and wellness area?
I can jump in. So my dissertation focuses on pipeline programs. So if you really want to be involved in a career in health, please, please, please find out if there is a pipeline program at your local community college or university, or if your high school has an academy. I actually chair the Health Sciences Network for the Industry Advisory Board for the District of Columbia Career and Technical Education. So our scholars, they actually have an interest in going into health. And so they take several classes throughout their entire high school curriculum, and it prepares them for a career in health. And also look at internships as well. That will provide you the information and opportunities to really make that decision. Maybe you don't like the sight of blood. How do you know unless you're exposed? So, yep, be involved.
If I can chime in with just one really quick piece that I really find helpful in this world, right? Because it's hard, and burnout is like insanely common amongst people who care for others. I think you just have to realize that, like, I don't know, my biggest advice for getting into health and wellness is you're taking on other people's problems. Is that something that you are passionate about? Because you have to be passionate about it. I'm sure everyone's heard over the last couple of years of the pandemic, the huge great resignation from everywhere. But I mean, in the hospitals, we have been crushed. And it's because it's just a very taxing, emotionally taxing thing. And that's not to say don't do it, but know that if this is a career path that you want, I mean, whether you're a doctor or whether you're, cleaning somebody's room or cooking for them or doing any piece that's in healthcare and wellness, just know that have that passion, right? And figure it out. So that's the piece I give. And that's what I really think we need more of in health and wellness is it's not just about, necessarily, oh, doctors make a lot of money or they, whatever that stuff. It's got to be about, we had an amazing speaker that spoke to us just about how compassion is almost more effective in care than any kind of science, right? So have compassion, have energy, have that passion for what you do. That's a really, really important piece of this work.
I would say to try to really think about what you want and what you need. Sometimes we get scared of like approaching those questions directly. Like, oh, what do I want to be doing now? What's my 5-year plan? What's my 10-year? Like that can be scary stuff to approach in an earnest way. So if there's ways to bring curiosity, to bring playfulness, to like talk to people or to learn about other people's story. Of course, I'm going to say talk to people. But the more information you can gather to get a sense of the lay of the land, and you can pivot, but just to be thinking of what your needs are, what you need from a job in terms of money and benefits and stability, what you want from a job in terms of it being meaningful or exciting or fun or interesting or stimulating, just be thinking about that, be paying attention to it, and continuing to get a sense of what you're looking for and what's possible, and sort of mapping those onto each other.
I wanted to say one more thing real quick. I didn't mean for my answer to come off as being like, you can't, it's really hard, because it is also the most fulfilling work I have ever done in my whole life. So I just wanted to put that icing on the cake, because it is something you got to stay up and in, but at the same time, when you make that connection or you help someone, it's, oh my gosh, it's the best thing.
Yeah, that's definitely true. Another audience question is coming from a senior. Are there any environmental careers that stand out in your minds as in demand, sustainable, and that provide a living wage?
I'll just jump in and say, I've been really encouraged to see the explosion in interest and resources and sort of new, at least, academic pathways and career pathways around mental health and environment. And I find that so encouraging, because that's really not a conversation that we were having even 5 years ago, at least not in sort of the mainstream conversations about climate, around environmental injustice. And now, just a couple of years later, eco-anxiety was the runner-up for Oxford's Word of the Year 2 years ago. There's just been this kind of explosion around an interest in well-being and mental health, and the way that all of the changes that we're seeing around us. And I think actually that the pandemic has really kind of accelerated that focus, that it's not just about learning facts and content and information, but being sort of, emotionally resourced, and having those kinds of existential tools to navigate all of the difficulty that all of us are dealing with on all levels, but particularly people who go into difficult work, whether that is, healthcare or climate work, or are these types of professions where you're dealing with like these wicked problems, right? And as John pointed out, even sort of thinking of any of this work as something that we're going to solve in a single lifetime is very kind of a limited perspective, but that feels incredibly overwhelming, right? Because as an individual, we feel, oh my gosh, how can I ever tackle or resolve this problem as a single person or within the course of a single career? And so I think we've really overlooked those mental health resources, but it's so exciting to see that field opening up. And so if that's something that anybody is interested in going into, wow, like you're starting to see all kinds of programs and courses and workshops out there just at all levels in organizations, from smaller community organizations all the way up to universities and hospitals and mental health programs on state and federal levels. So I would say that that's one that comes to mind to me in terms of what the pay and the sustainability is. That I can't necessarily speak to that, because I think it's going to vary so much depending on which kind of discipline you work in or what institution. But in terms of a kind of a growth area, my gosh, that's one that really comes to mind prominently for me.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I think we have time for one more question, and this one also comes from the audience. These paths are inspiring. How do I convince students and parents that paths change, options really are limitless if you're willing to explore, and your education doesn't need to be directly tied to the job you take?
I think I have put something in the chat. It's not about convincing them, it's telling them. So in the health education and leadership program that I lead through the Rodham Institute, I do engage with the parents of our scholars. And it isn't convincing that Johnny is going to change his mind. It's just telling them that Johnny could change his mind, and that's okay. But as long as you're planning and exposing, you don't have to worry about that, right? So exposure is the key, because if you can see yourself in that career, there's a higher probability that you will succeed in being in that career, right? So it's not about convincing, it's simply telling and then exposing.
I also think it's important to include that, like, until you find that spark that kind of lights your fire, and that's something that's experienced, right? You can't like see that on TV and think that's what I'm going to be. Like, I think you to that exposure point that Ashanti made, like, that's really what you have to know, is that you might be on the most direct path, but then that spark hits you and you just, you could just zip right off in the other direction. And I would argue that some of the biggest change makers, some of the most insanely creative and innovative people in the world, look at their career paths. I doubt they were very linear. They definitely changed mid-route. They definitely had experiences. And I think that's really the kind of way you need to look at it, is until you kind of really find that thing that makes you kind of zing, it's hard to say that you're going to stay on the same path, unless you're just someone that does want to do that, right? I mean, that's totally fine. But I think in this kind of work that's so innovative, there's so many things that are changing, and the problems are just getting more smacking you in the face. So if you're going to jump into this kind of stuff, just be ready to find that the thing you thought you were interested in might not be it, but the thing you do find could be insanely more fulfilling and exciting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would add, like, it's your life, you get to live it. You get to decide how you want to make the choices, what's important to you, what values you want to lead with, how no one else has the right answer. I felt like I was talking to so many people, and some point I wanted someone to just say, Hannah, based on your interests, your experience, and your values, here is the correct answer. And that didn't quite happen. And eventually I realized, I really had to take in all the information I had and figure out what I wanted to do. And I could always move from there, but it's your life and there aren't really rules of the road. You get to make it up, and you can take in whatever information or ideas or inspiration or support you can to, and it can be hard figuring this out, and it can be overwhelming, and it can be exciting, and it's a whole, it's life.
I might just say as a closing, I think it's less about thinking in terms of pathways as established pathways, and more about thinking in terms of relationships. And that's the thread that I've heard kind of run through everybody's account, which was, the people that they encountered, the relationships that they forged. That's really what opened different doorways and ended up kind of helping to determine and support how all of us have gotten to where we are. Relationships, networking.
Yes, relationships are so important. Well, thank you all, and thank you to all of our panelists for bringing your perspectives to this panel and sharing your stories with the EcoCareers community. It has been so great to share this space with you all on my end, and we also appreciate it on the EcoCareers side. Also, thank you to our audience and those who joined the session. And a reminder that some of the panelists have put their contact information in the chat if you want to follow up and connect. We will now transition into a 15-minute break, so be sure to check out the colleges, universities, and other organizations in the expo hall. Thank you all.